All the Knights of the Nerds table have diversified and different opinions on who is the best comic book movie director of all time. Mainly because we all want different things. Some in our group like relatable stories with sitcom-like humor, like Taika Waititi's Thor Ragnarok. Some of us love grandiose stories of gods walking among humans, like Zack Snyder's Watchmen. And sometimes you may just want to watch a political thriller, like Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight. Comic book directors are now much like comic book writers. Everyone is trying to be a good steward and honor the established mythos of the properties that they are adapting, while at the same time making the material new and contemporary to the times. Today, I want to discuss a beloved but controversial comic book movie director. This gentleman got his biggest Hollywood break in the horror genre. He was then hired to direct an adaptation of comic book stories for one of the largest movie studios in the world. He created a unique cinematic language that has strong admirers and strong critics. He was subsequently fired from his role after 2 of his installments and hired by a rival studio. But thanks to fellow actors and an active online fan base rallying towards him, he was able to finish his original trilogy. He's now building out his own universe with one of his original boss's competitors, with more creative control than ever before. If you are a longtime fan of this channel, you probably think I'm referring to the GOAT himself, Zack Snyder. But I'm actually referring to director and DC studio co-head James Francis Gunn Jr. So, if you haven't already, let's like and subscribe to our channel and dive into the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of James Gunn, the man we are trusting to resurrect the DC brand. Like all comic book characters, James Gunn had humble beginnings. Born in the great state of Missouri to Irish and Jewish parents in the 1960s, Gunn was greatly influenced by low-budget horror films, such as Night of the Living Dead and Friday the 13th. He began to start filming home movies with his brothers and sisters into his teenage years. He went on to earn a Bachelor's of Art from St. Louis University and a Master of Fine Arts from Columbia University in 1995. Gunn then began his track to Hollywood when he co-wrote the independent film Romeo and Juliet. Between the years of 2002 and 2004 is when James Gunn's career really began to take off. He wrote the screenplay for both Scooby-Doo, the 2002 movie, and its sequel, Scooby-Doo, Monsters Unleashed. Most notably in 2004, he co-wrote the remake of the horror classic Dawn of the Dead. The former king of the DCEU, Zack Snyder, directed this remake. Dawn of the Dead was certainly the biggest break for both of their careers, and they went their separate ways after that and of course have had success in both of their own rights. From that point on, Gunn made a few movies that only die-hard Gunn fans know of. He was involved with a few different web series online, and he directed movies like Slither and Super. During this time, he married Jenna Fisher, or Pam from the highly popular NBC show The Office. Everything changed for James Gunn in 2012 when Marvel President and Chief Creative Officer Kevin Feige hired him to direct Guardians of the Galaxy. It's hard to imagine it now, but back then, the public had severe doubts about how well the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise would do. I mean, the team has a talking tree and an alien raccoon for God's sake. At the time, people thought this was going to be Marvel's first flop, but James Gunn, the underdog filmmaker, made his movie of underdogs in the MCU a hit. Although the film certainly fits the general Marvel formula, the film was infused with Gunn's unique and zany humor. He inserted the film with a incredibly unique soundtrack filled with oldie pop music and lent the movie his own personal cinematic language. By the end of this film, you are eagerly rooting for this band of misfits. A death of a tree is making you cry, you're chortling along with a random raccoon's quips. Gunn was now a serious comic book movie director. This solidified not only Gunn's career, but also proved that Parks and Rec veteran Chris Pratt was a serious Hollywood action star. Gunn and Chris Pratt followed this movie with a sequel, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Although this movie wasn't nearly as good as the first Guardians movie, it was still a solid hit. Gunn became more and more influential behind the scenes at Marvel Studios. He began to be mentored by Kevin Feige and started giving notes on different MCU movies behind the scenes. Dude was on top of the world. It was almost too good to be true. And here we are at the most controversial and lowest moment of James Gunn's career. You see, James Gunn was caught up in a bit of an internet culture war. On Twitter, he was very outspoken in regards to conservative politics, particularly against the Trump administration. Many online conservatives were not super happy to see the successful Hollywood director use his platform to speak out against then current President Donald Trump. So a lot of online warriors went after Gunn for very distasteful tweets that Gunn had made over the years. The type of humor he used was not super surprising when you look at James Gunn's background in horror and some of the C-list shock movies he used to direct. Although I am not going to discuss his tweets here, I want to be clear about this. These tweets were deeply inappropriate and horrific, regardless of their original intent to be jokes. They're just not funny, and Gunn at the age of 40 should have known better. Now, the weird thing about this is that Disney already knew about these tweets and Gunn had apologized for them. But it was trending on Twitter and people were upset about the controversy of cancel culture. This was around the time that Roseanne Barr was fired from her widely successful reboot of her self-entitled sitcom. Roseanne lost everything, argued conservatives. Why shouldn't Gunn lose everything too? So in June of 2018, Kevin Feige called his longtime friend and the man he was mentoring to be one of the main architects of the MCU post-Endgame. Gunn asked Feige, "Hey man, is this really a big deal?" Feige regretfully said, "Yeah James, we're gonna have to let you go." And the once up-and-coming director who was on his way to being one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood was now an outcast, someone no one wanted to touch. He was cancelled. But that wasn't for long. The following Monday, James Gunn got a call from Marvel and Disney competitor, Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers saw an opportunity to scoop up talent for their flailing DC universe. Marvel's trash was another man's treasure, I suppose. They offered him any DC project of his choice. Particularly, they were excited to maybe see him do a Superman sequel. But Gunn wasn't convinced he was the right man for that job. So since that didn't work, DC tried to seduce him into doing another project. Maybe get back into the spotlight with just a little writing at first and then direct. Well, at the time, DC was in the process of trying to get a sequel to their 2016 movie, Suicide Squad. The movie was incredibly financially successful in 2016, but was panned by critics, so Warner Brothers wanted new eyes on the follow-up to that movie. As a reminder, we now know that the studio cut of the Suicide Squad was not director David Ayer's original vision. It was hacked up in editing by the studio to unironically resemble more closely to James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy series. Like Zack Snyder, David Ayer has been campaigning to get his original cut released. So, #release the Ayer cut. Back to Gunn's resurrection, he agreed to write the sequel to Suicide Squad and eventually direct it under the condition that it could be rated R rather than PG-13. It ended up being a soft reboot of the original Suicide Squad, with some of the principal cast coming back. Barbenheimer Queen Margot Robbie returned, Joel Kinnaman reprised Rick Flag, and Viola Davis came back as Amanda Waller. Will Smith's Deadshot was replaced by Idris Elba's Bloodsport, and Jared Leto's Joker was nowhere to be seen. Gunn commented multiple times that the making of the Suicide Squad was so cathartic for him. He didn't know if anyone wanted to see him making movies again, and apparently, people did. He was also given a lot of creative freedom by Warner Brothers. Now, just like Zack Snyder, James Gunn has a very loyal fan base, and his actors from Guardians of the Galaxy, particularly Chris Pratt and David Bautista, heavily campaigned for his return to Disney and Marvel. The cast members of Guardians of the Galaxy even put together an open letter where they publicly pushed Marvel to rehire the man that gave a lot of them their first chance to be big movie stars. We've already discussed Chris Pratt, but even Dave Bautista was helped a lot by Gunn. He had gone from verified wrestler to a serious action lead as well. They owed Gunn a lot, and they wanted to be there in his time of need. Fans on social media were also tweeting, #BringBackJamesGunn. And above all odds, in 2019, Disney rehired James Gunn for Guardians of the Galaxy 3. He was now officially working for both major comic book movie studios, DC and Marvel. The release of both the Suicide Squad reboot and Guardians 3 was delayed by the pandemic in 2020. But by 2021, his DC debut, The Suicide Squad, was released. Because of limited theatrical releases, Warner Bros. Decided at the time to release The Suicide Squad in theaters and on HBO Max, which limited its profit in theaters. So theatrically, the film made only around $170 million. The pandemic was somewhat the cause for this, but even other movies released during this time, like Godzilla vs. Kong, made around $470 million with a streaming and theatrical release. But on the positive side for Gunn, his product was very well reviewed. Currently, this movie holds about a 90% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes and 87% from audiences. And the theory, as James Gunn puts it, if the product is good, the audience will eventually come. Walter Hamada, the head of DC at the time, really loved the film and wanted to build off of it. So one character from his movie got a spin-off. John Cena starred in the HBO Max original series, Peacemaker, which was also directed by James Gunn. That show also got mostly positive reviews. Although I personally didn't really connect with the Suicide Squad, I found a lot of joy in Peacemaker. I mean, just look at the opening sequence, when all the cast and characters dance around to Wigwam's Do You Want to Taste It? Classic. It's just fun, and we needed that in 2021 as we adjusted to the crazy world around us. While Gunn was enjoying moderate success with his DC ventures, there were a lot of changes going on at Warner Brothers. In April of 2022, Warner Brothers was officially acquired by Discovery and now went under the new name Warner Brothers Discovery. And with that came the new leadership of CEO David Zaslav. Zaslav wanted to right the ship for Warner Brothers in a lot of ways, and one of the first things he wanted to do was to find someone to lead DC Studios. At first, it appeared that Zazzy was going to tap well-known producer Dan Lin to lead the universe, but that fell through. Joker director Todd Phillips was reportedly considered as well, but that didn't work out either. But in the end, Zaslav was impressed with the work that James Gunn had done so far, and in a Hollywood shocker of a move, he hired James Gunn and his longtime producer Peter Safran to lead DC Studios. Our little upstart, the underdog of underdogs, who was basically fully canceled just 3 years prior, was now in charge of some of the most coveted IP in all of Hollywood. The honeymoon period for the King of DC was short-lived. He and Safran had a huge job in front of them. The DC universe was in complete disarray. 2013 DC to 2017 DC marked the end of the Zack Snyder era. And although I am a Snyder bro through and through, we all know that that era was divisive to fans and critics alike. After Warner Brothers had abandoned the core of the Snyderverse, they had sidelined and put in limbo Henry Cavill's Superman and Ben Affleck's Batman. Wonder Woman was given a sequel since it was seen as the most successful piece of the Snyder era. Harley Quinn was also given a spin-off, Birds of Prey, since she was seen as the most successful part of the Suicide Squad. Cyborg and Flash were sidelined with the Flash movie wallowing in development hell, and Aquaman in 2018 served as a surprise to the DCEU. It was the biggest financial hit for the DCEU, hitting the coveted $1 billion engrossing mark. Beyond that, 2019 Shazam was well received, but had little box office power like the rest of the universe. It was pretty disconnected. To make matters even more confusing, we had separate Elseworld stories like Matt Reeves' The Batman and Todd Phillips' The Joker. Those stories had no connection to mainline movies. The biggest problem was that these two movies were much better received than most of their mainline products, financially and critically. Along with all that was DC's sprawling animated series, the CW series, and all the video game adaptations as well. The DC fanbase was extremely divided and fractured. Gunn and Safran have to find a way to unite all the fan bases and restore confidence in the DC brand as a whole. Now, this is the part of the video that I'm sure a lot of people are interested in talking about, because as talented of a director as he is, James Gunn was and still is an unproven executive. But this is where we will stop for now, as this is going to be one of 2 videos. I wanted to cover James Gunn the director in depth, so I can also dig into James Gunn the executive in depth. So like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you next time on Knights of the Nerds Table to discuss James Gunn the executive in about a week or 2. We'll see how long this takes. Anyway, night out.